If I were to ask you, do you know your greatest temptation? Would you be able to say, oh yeah, I know exactly, it's this? Maybe you've got a list. This is one, this is two. Or maybe you wonder, because greatest temptation, you have to define it a little bit. Does that mean difficulty overcoming? Is that my greatest temptation? Or is it the potential impact of it if I give in to it? When I don't resist, it has the most serious consequences. You know, I thought about that, you know, greatest temptation in terms of difficulty overcoming, that'd be that bag of double stuffed Oreos. You know, it usually gets the best of me, but as far as real implications, you know, it has some, but boy, not as serious as some other things that I struggle with. What is your greatest temptation? And again, even more, you know, what are the problems it results in? The times that you do give in, the times that you succumb to that temptation, what happens? What's it do to you? How do you feel? What's it do to people around you? There are many things that affect, you know, our family, our friends, whatever situation we're in. What are the effects? What are the consequences, the result? And then I thought about, okay, with that in mind, what would it look like to be rid of that? To, if not completely, at least be able to resist it more than I do now. What would that life look like? What would that, and maybe you can stop and think, wow, this wouldn't happen, and that one, oh, it'd be so much better. And wouldn't you like to have that? I mean, whatever it is that you have in mind, whatever that temptation, whatever the result, whatever it would look like if it didn't happen, I think we'd all like to have it. And chances are, before, it's not like this is some new thought this morning, like, oh, I never thought of that not being present. Chances are you've been trying to overcome and resist that temptation, and if it's still at number one on your list, it means you haven't. That means I haven't. What have we been doing? We've apparently not been doing it very wisely, going about trying to resist that temptation. You know, are you trying to overcome it the same way? You've heard the definition of insanity. Try the same thing over and over and expect different results. Maybe we've been trying to resist a temptation the same way, and boy, it hasn't worked, and we just keep trying the same way. We are in James chapter 1, verses 9 to 12 today. We started this series a few weeks ago in the book of James, and I've said I did it because we spent 42 weeks in Matthew, and it was just so foundational. You know, basically it came down to be committed to God. You know, if He is God and we're to worship Him, well, the implication is worshiping the Creator of the universe, declaring, knowing His worth, means I just have to be all out committed to Him. But it was very general. It was very foundational. And so I thought, let's look at James because it gets specific. And the specific thing it does, as I look through it, basically it does give specifics. And you could summarize them, you could quantify all of them as God's divine expectations for us. Here's what I expect of committed believers, committed disciples. You should do this. You shouldn't do this. And so that's what we're seeing in this book. And today we come to James chapter 1, starting at verse 9. And here's what he says. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. Well, the first thing to always ask when you look at a passage is, how does it fit into the context? How does this fit what was before or what comes after, and is it meant to? There are some books of the Bible that are far more divided than others. You know, of course, the extreme would be like Proverbs, even Psalms, where they are separate entities. There's still a theme that you'll find running through there. In the New Testament, I always think of the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul has a checklist. You can tell, here's the problems in Corinth. All right, dealt with that one, check. Dealt with that one, check. But even then, there's a little bit of, again, a theme that runs through. But most books are entirely thematic. The entire book really needs to be taken into account, and certainly a section, a context. What's the context here? And I think in this case, the NIV does a good job of dividing it, putting that major heading that, you know, was added later. But verses 1 to 18 are the first block in James, and they give us this context. And so these verses fall right in the middle of it. How do they fit? What do they have to do with what we've seen before? And let's look. Start at verse 2 and just a little refresher. We've seen it for a few weeks, but again, I think it's one of the most important passages in the Bible, really, and in some ways the most misunderstood. James starts off his book saying, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." And prior to a few weeks ago, maybe you said, how in the world? Not just how in the world, that just sounds stupid. To be happy when bad things happen. But remember, that's not what James is saying. He's saying consider it. This won't be your natural reaction, your response to difficulties. He says consider it pure joy. This attitude, not a feeling, not an emotion, an attitude, which is a frame of reference for acting. And joy specifically is this confidence that in whatever the situation, God can receive glory. I trust that because He's in control and He loves me. That's joy. And it's something he says, notice, consider it pure joy. Decide to have it ahead of time. Don't wait until everything happens, and then joy will come to you. There certainly will be some element of that, but he's saying consider it. Right when the trial starts, consider it pure joy. Whenever you face trials of many kinds, and remember we said, many kinds, trials. It could be the things that everyone faces, like natural disasters or recessions. It could be persecution, as we just talked about, that Christians face. And it also could be temptations, and that's what we're going to see today, that element of trials. Consider it pure joy. That's what we're to do. How are we to do that? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Whatever the trial is, the specific circumstance, whether it's the need for forgiveness or patience or controlling anger or dealing with difficult finances or relationships, our faith is being tested. Our faith in God, that His principles for living are best, because God says to forgive, and that's not usually my first response. And so I have to trust, I have to have faith. God, I think you know what you're talking about. It doesn't feel like it, but I'm going to consider it pure joy. You can receive glory. My faith is being tested, and my faith can persevere. It can become a persevering faith, a faith that can stand up to more and more difficult circumstances. And then he says, let perseverance finish its work. Perseverance brings about something. What is it? He says, maturity and completeness. Let it finish its work so you may be mature and complete. That mature level of commitment. I'm not perfect, but I am fully committed to God and complete. I know the basic doctrines of the Bible. I don't know every single detail. I can't tell you Absalom's third son's name. I don't know that. But I know the basics of God's holy, He's loving, I can trust Him, He's in control. Those things I know. I know about grace. I know all that. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. And we say, well, how's that one fit? He wasn't talking about wisdom. Well, it's going to take wisdom. Knowledge is what needs to happen, and the what is consider it pure joy when you face trials. Wisdom is, how do I do that? How do I consider it? Even when I know that it's going to make me mature and complete, how do I do that? And wisdom says, you know what? You look at who God is, and you look at what's possible, and you push aside everything that's telling you to not obey His principles, everything that says you'll be better off if you get angry, if you're impatient, if you don't forgive. All the things that distract us from God and His principles and the rightness of them. That's the wisdom. God says, if you need the wisdom to see your way through this situation, ask me. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. Matter of fact, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, because He gives generously to all, without finding fault. And it will be given to you. It's guaranteed, with the one condition we saw last week. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. And we said that's not really a good translation there. There's no American version that has a really good translation. Ask in faith, as the New American Standard says, that's a better translation than belief, because belief is usually just the assent. I believe in my mind. And a lot of us think, well, I have to believe God will give me wisdom. That's what he's saying there. And don't doubt that, oh, well, maybe this situation is so complicated there is no wisdom. There's no way to get out of it. There's no way to get through it even. He's not saying that. He says, ask in faith with this commitment that is surrendered to God and reliant on God. God, whatever you say, and that's what the word doubt means too. That's a really bad translation. It's more like judging and contending. You can't say, God, give me your wisdom on how to handle this situation, and if I like what you say, I'll follow it. But I'm going to sit here and I'm going to weigh what you tell me versus what seems right, what the world says, whether I like what you say. I'll be the judge of this, God. You can't do that. You have to ask in faith, total commitment without this judging. Whatever it is, I've signed my name on the bottom of a blank sheet. God, you give me the wisdom. I'm committed to following it. It says if you do that, then you'll get wisdom. Otherwise, it's not God saying, I'm not going to give it to you. You're saying, God, I'll only take it if it's this. He says, well, it's not. My wisdom's not what you've limited it to. And he goes on to describe that because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. So the consequences go beyond just when you're facing trials. Don't expect to receive anything from God if you're saying, God, I'll only take this. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So that is our context for today. That's what we've seen the past few weeks. Well, how does it fit then when he says believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position? That's where it goes next. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant, its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade even when they go about their business. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. Did you see something that ties it into that first section that we've been looking at the past few weeks? Verse 12, blessed is the one who what? Perseveres under trial. Well, that sounds a lot like verse 2, doesn't it? Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. And then 3, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So what it seems to be saying here is this is a certain kind of trial. James is talking about, he's giving some examples of trials. And as we said, these trials are temptations. The temptations that you're faced with as a Christian to not obey God's principles. These are some specific examples. And so what's James saying? How else does it tie in? Well, look what he says. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation. Ought to. Should. Now what's that sound like? He's giving advice. Another word for that advice, he's giving some wisdom, don't you think? James is saying, all right, I've just told you, if you need wisdom to get through a situation, ask God and He'll give generously. Ask in faith, though, without any judging. Well, here he gives some specific trials, and he gives the wisdom. Here's the wise way to resist these temptations. That's really what we're going to see today. James is getting specific here. He's giving that wisdom. And so let's look at that. And here's the question to have in mind as we go through today. What is the wise way to resist my greatest temptation? James is talking about some specific temptations there. Well, we're going to see that, but we also want to see the general principle for us. How do I face that thing that came to mind when I asked you, what's your greatest temptation? How do I get over that? How do I resist it? So let's break it down. We've read the verses already a few times, but let's get it in our head. Verses 9, start with verses 9 through 11. 12 is definitely separate there. Follows it up, wraps it up. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation. Let's stop there. He says believers in humble circumstances. So obviously he's talking about Christians there. Some people question when in verse 10, but he says, but the rich. Now is he talking about just rich people in general? I don't think so. I think he's still talking about believers. It's applying to both. He said it at the beginning, believers in humble circumstances, but the rich believers. And it makes sense. You remember what we saw at the beginning of the book. He's addressing this book to Christians, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. So specifically Jewish Christians that he was writing to. And then he's going to say later, brothers. He's talking to Christians. So both groups are Christian. And the two groups he describes as believers in humble circumstances. And that could be whatever. You know, a humble circumstance could mean different things. But then he contrasts it with the rich. So it seems what he's talking about is financially humble. People who have a lot of money, the rich, People who don't have as much money, those are in humbler circumstances. Their dwellings, their houses, their food, their clothing is, it's more humble, it's lower compared to what the rich probably have. A few things right there. I mean, we could spend a lot of time right there. First of all, what's that tell you about, what was going on in James' day and really what to expect? There will always be rich and poor, and not just rich people and poor Christians. There will always be some Christians who are richer than others and some Christians who are poorer than others. And back in James' day, you remember there was no middle class. You were either rich or poor, and he's saying there's both. There's both. And he doesn't say that it's wrong for there to be both. Now, there will be temptations for the rich, that's for sure. But two things. First of all, he doesn't say they're evil. It doesn't say you rich are inherently evil. And the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. But it doesn't say money is. It certainly doesn't say the people who have money are evil. Now, are there temptations for rich people? Absolutely. You remember Jesus said, it's harder for a rich person to enter the kingdom than a camel would go through the eye of the needle. It doesn't mean they can't be in. There were rich followers of Jesus while he was alive. There were rich followers mentioned in Acts in the New Testament, definitely. But there are temptations for them that are different from people who aren't rich, and probably more than those who aren't. But the other thing about it, there's temptations for humble believers too. That's the whole point of this passage. They have theirs, the rich have theirs. Both of them have temptations. Now, one thing that sort of a little extra, because it comes up every once in a while, it may be coming up, who knows, in the upcoming election. Certainly one approach to things. There is no command in the Bible for Christians to redistribute their wealth. When it talked about they had all things in common, that meant that they were open to helping other Christians. It didn't mean that everyone sold everything, put it in a pot, and then divided it among the people in the room. That's really the truth. But people look at Acts and they say that. Look, there is nowhere in the Bible that says redistribute the wealth. There are plenty of commands, though, that talk about helping those who don't have as much. That is in the Bible. That is commanded. But again, it's still the persons who has it. It's theirs. They are, though, to use that, to give some to help someone else. And even then, and this is one thing that I think is lost sight of a lot today, go and look at some of those passages. And again, the context, not just maybe the specific verse, helping widows and orphans in their need, but look at what he's talking about. Look at what Jesus was talking about. The focus is on believers. Now, I'm not saying don't help unbelievers, but I think today there's just this big focus. Let's go do this big event and help these people with just the food or this or that. And it's like, that's not where the Bible's putting the focus, because that's not the eternal thing. You help meet someone's physical need, and they're not a believer, and there's no part of it that's helping them, with the thought in mind of them hearing the gospel. You haven't really helped them. You've met a physical need. You've made them more comfortable on their way to an eternity separate from God. So read what the Bible says. Again, I think there's a big focus today about churches. There's some churches take off a Sunday morning and don't worship, and they go do some community thing. And I think it's missing the point in a few different ways. Again, it's not saying don't help those who aren't Christians. I'm not saying that at all. But you look at the context. I think one thing that is clear, there should be no one in a church setting that is in need who is trying to meet their need. Now, there was another time in the Bible where people had quit their jobs. They sat on the mountain waiting for Jesus to come, and then when he didn't come soon enough, they needed money. And like, hey, the rest of you, give us some money. And Paul says, if you don't work, you don't eat. So there is that principle. Not just help someone who's totally irresponsible, but there shouldn't be Christians in need, while other Christians have means to help them. So, as a professor of mine used to say, that didn't cost you anything. Threw that extra in for free. So there's believers in humble circumstances. There's rich believers. Look what he says. He has specific advice and wisdom for each one. He says believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. Now, in a little bit, in some way, that's sort of like the wait a minute moment. I think the next one's even more of a wait a minute moment. But what's it mean for a believer in humble circumstances to take pride in their high position? Poor people weren't like elevated. It wasn't like, wow, look at that. What a person. I wish I was like that. What's the high position? I think what he's talking about is eternally. This person is saved. You should take pride in your high position of being saved. Now, and I just realized I missed something there. The whole thought of we're often, we're not encouraged in the Bible to take pride, to have pride, to boast, as it says in the English Standard. You should boast in this. But there is one exception in the Bible where it says this is something you not only can boast in, you should boast in. Look what it says in Romans. Romans chapter 5, verses 2 and 11 says, "And we boast in the hope of the glory of God." What is that? We boast in the hope of the glory of God. Hope, the difference between hope and faith. Faith is this general, I have faith in God. And again, we get this confused today. We often say, I have faith that this certain thing's going to happen that God never promised. No, I have faith in God, whatever He does. Hope is different. Hope does, and I agree with you back there, Gene. Hope does have something specific. Where you see hope, that means God has made a specific promise. And I have hope in that. God is going to fulfill His promise. Well, what's the promise here? That as a believer, I am going to receive the glory of God. I am going to be in the presence of God's glory in heaven. But even now, I'm going to be transformed, as it says in 2 Corinthians, into Christ's image, His glory. I boast in. What's important in my life? I'm going to heaven. And in this life, I'm becoming more and more like Christ. And he goes on to say, we also boast in verse 11, in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. That's the how. The what is, I'm going to heaven. The how is, why? Because God, of all things, God created the world, and when we screwed it up, what did He do? He said, I'm going to take care of this. You get more than one chance. And you know what I'm going to do to take care of this? I'm going to sacrifice my Son, who's God Himself. I'm going to sacrifice myself. I'm going to pay the price. That's the how, and that's what we boast in. I'm going to heaven, and it is not because I'm a great guy. It's because God is so amazing. That's what we boast in. So it is okay in one sense to boast, and that's what he's talking about there when he says then, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. Take pride, boast in the fact, I'm going to heaven. I realize my life here isn't much now. I don't have much now. But I've got eternity waiting for me in the presence of God. I've got a mansion in heaven. I've got everything you can imagine. That's what I boast in. It says in the New American Standard to glory in. That's my glory. When you see me, that's what I want you to see. It says in 1 John 1:12, to all who did receive Him, to those who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. That's what's true of me. I may be the poorest person in the neighborhood, the poorest person on the planet. But if I'm a Christian, I'm a child of God. We often say everyone's a child of God. In one sense we are, but the Bible makes it clear believers are a child of God in a special sense. And it's offered to everyone, to all who did receive Him, He gave the right to become that. But it is a right, it's a privilege. That's something to boast in, to take pride in. And that's what he's talking about here. You humble believers, you know what? The thing that you need to focus on in your life, I've got God now, and I'll be with Him for eternity. And then he turns to the rich. And this one at first is even harder to understand. The rich should take pride in their humiliation. What's so humiliating about being rich? I volunteer to find out. Make me rich, God, and I'll see what the humiliation is so I can set an example for all these fine people. What is the humiliation of being rich? Well, as always, the clue to understanding anything, there's three keys to understanding something in the Bible. Context, context, and context. Thank you. So look what he says. The rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. Notice it doesn't say their wealth will pass away. It says they will pass away. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. And in that area they knew what the sun could do. A dry, sunny day, how it could wither the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away. Again, not just their wealth, the rich, even while they go about their business. So notice a couple things there. Pass away, fade away. Again, it's not talking about their wealth. There's other passages that talk about, wealth will rust or moths will eat the clothes. This is talking about the person himself or herself. But I also thought it was interesting, the focus is just on the rich. Are poor people going to pass away and fade away? Absolutely. But he focuses on the rich. Why is he doing that? And why is he talking to them? I think the key is here, money can do a lot in your life. No one's going to deny that. You know, money can buy you a house. Money can buy you, back in their day, they didn't have the car. It can buy you the clothes. It can buy you some security to know I've got this much money. All things being equal, I'm set for this long. Money can do so much. But the one thing money can't do is it can't overcome the fragility of life, the frailty of life, the limitedness of life. Now, maybe it can help in some way. Maybe if you're rich, you get better health care or this or that, but there's a limit to it. Bill Gates may be 1,000, 10,000 times richer than I am. He's not going to live 1,000 times longer than me. All the best doctors, all that, whatever, it's not going to happen. There is a limit to what money can do, and that's what I think the focus is on here. The rich should take pride in their humiliation. What's their humiliation? In the sense of, this money of mine, everything that it can do, it can't do anything about the fact I'm going to die. And I take pride in that. Why? Because that puts the focus on God. I'm going to stand before Him just like everyone else. I'm going to spend eternity just like everyone else. And the only way it's going to happen for me in a good way is because of God. My money's not going to help me live longer. It's not going to help me live in heaven versus not in heaven. It all comes down to I'm glorying in my humiliation of what my money can't do, which puts the focus on God and what He has done. That's the difference there. And so the same thing, take pride in that. Let that be your focus. Let that be your glory, not anything else. Yeah?
So the persecution, were rich and poor Christians persecuted equally, or was the persecution most for the poor?
No, the persecution would have been for both. Again, when the Jews started, persecuting Christians, and this is what happened. The Jews in Jerusalem were, persecuting the Christians, and they left. Now, again, sort of like other things, do the rich maybe have some advantages on escaping it? Yeah, more resources, more means to escape it. But they were still targeted because it was all based on the fact you're a Christian, you're a believer. So, what's the point of this then? So here he said to these people, the humble circumstances take pride in your high position. The rich should take pride in their humiliation. Think about it for a minute. If you're a humble, and again, really a poor Christian, if you're not focused on your high position, if you're not focused on the fact that you are saved, you're going to spend eternity with God, what might you be tempted to focus on? What's that?
Worldly.
And what for a poor person would be their worldly situation? Yeah, wanting to be rich. Yeah, the focus on their worldly situation would be, here's what I don't have. I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this. God, why don't you see how it can easily get to, God, why, look, He's got all that, God. I don't have that. You see what that temptation is? That's where it is. And really, if you thought about it, again, the two keys to faith and commitment are what? They're being surrendered to God and being reliant on God. What's a poor person not doing if that's where their mind is at? Why don't I have this? Why does they have this? Are they not surrendered or not reliant? I'd say surrendered, wouldn't you? Try again and you will, yeah. In the sense of, this is my situation. God, it's not really what I want, but I'm surrendered to it. Whereas the rich person, if they're not focused on, if they're not taking pride in their humiliation, what are they tempted to focus on and take pride in?
Their accomplishments and whatnot.
Here's everything I've got. I've got a great house. I've got all these sets of clothes. Again, you think about their day and age. Ours, I've got all these possessions. I've got the nicer car. I've got the TV. That's where my focus is. And that's the temptation. Why? Because then that undermines their reliance on God. I'm doing all right. I don't really need God. I'm doing pretty well. Life's going pretty well for me. I can understand why that person over there, that humble believer, needs God. I'd need something too. But not me. I'm doing okay. That's the temptation. Both of those have temptations. And what is James doing? He's giving them wisdom. Here's the best way for you to overcome your specific temptation. And that's what he says. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test. Again, the trial, the test in their case is temptation. And if you look at the next verse, if you have your Bibles open, you'll see how it fits in that context, because what's the very next words? Verse 13. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. See, that's how we're going to follow up next week. When I ask, how's this fit? You can remember. Well, he was talking about temptation here, even though he doesn't use the word temptation, but he uses it next. When I'm tempted, no one should say, oh, God's tempting me. And so, you apply this, a little preview, the poor person. No one should say, God, why are you tempting me to be greedy and tempted me to covet by not giving me the stuff that would keep me? God, I wouldn't be so covetous if you give me the stuff I want. God, why are you tempting me? Well, James says, no, when you're tempted, you're going to be tempted. When you are, don't say it's God. It's a part of life. And everyone has their specific temptations. And so what James is doing here, he's giving wisdom to persevere. He's giving wisdom to stand the test. To the humble believer, he says, you know how you withstand the temptation of look at all these things I don't have. Oh, God, why haven't you done this for me? He says, you need to take pride in what you do have. You've got a relationship with the Creator of the universe right now, and it's going to continue for eternity, long after this situation here is gone and forgotten. And to the rich Christian who's tempted to look at all I've got, oh, life is going well for me, I'm pretty set, I'm pretty secure. He says, you know what, you need to take pride in your humiliation, that all the money in the world is not going to keep you alive forever. And when you stand before me, it's all going to be about what I've done for you and whether you've accepted it or not. Don't get caught up in these things here. That's the wisdom. He's saying the how. Isn't that what wisdom is? Here's what you need to do. Don't give in to temptation. He's saying here's how to do it. If you're poor, here's how. If you're rich, here's how. That's what this whole section is. And so as we take that, what about us? How do we, that's great. And maybe there's an element of application for us. I think there is. The stuff he says to the humble believer and to the rich believer, I think in one sense we've got it worse, because just about everyone in the room I think we call middle class, and we're right in the middle. Again, they didn't have that back then. They had poor and they had rich. We've got the worst of both worlds, because we got enough money to think, oh, I'm doing okay. And we don't have enough money to have everything we want, so we can look at the things we don't have in people who have more. We've got both of the temptations. And so we need to realize, I don't have everything, but here's what I have. I've got a lot, but here's what it's worth when it all comes down to it. We've got on both ends. But I think there's a broader application. It's not just our financial situation. Again, every person, everyone in this room, every person, because of a situation, because of your personality, because of a time of life, all kinds of things, we all have a greatest temptation. That thing that I asked you, what's your greatest temptation? We all have one. What can we learn from this passage today to help us resist our greatest temptation? Again, what's the wise way to do that? Well, a few things. First of all, I need to know what my greatest temptation is. It says in Matthew 6, Jesus said, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That's part of the model prayer. Lead us not into temptation. And obviously God isn't planning on leading us into temptation, but the prayer is, God, lead me away from it. Lead me not into temptation. Lead me somewhere else. Well, wouldn't it be wise to know what my greatest temptation is that I need, God, here's the one that's in mind. When I say lead me not into temptation, I'm thinking about this one. Whatever it is, God, lead me away from it. Wouldn't it be helpful if I knew what it was? We need to know our greatest temptation. It's helpful to know that. And so, again, as I mentioned it, I think sometimes our situations lead to temptations. Again, if we've got a lot of money, there's a set of temptations that goes with that. If we're struggling financially, there's a set of temptations that goes with that. If we've been treated unfairly, by an individual, by a boss, by a company, aren't we tempted to act a certain way? I'm not bringing up anyone who talked about a day yesterday, but if I were, she'd probably say yes. You be careful what you talk about before church. It's because that'll be fresh on my mind. If we're running late, just think about some situations. I'm running late. Aren't there some temptations there that you don't have? you know, and you're today maybe sitting in front of the TV, although there's another one, you know, your team's losing. Isn't there a set of temptations there?
I don't know.
Okay, for the record, that was a Patriots fan, and you got to give her that. Okay, yeah, got to give her that. If you're stressed, there's a set of temptations there. Okay, here's what I'm prone to. Think about it. If you're young, okay, most of us won't identify with this, but there are a few. If you're young, you know, I've got plenty of time to do this God thing. You know, let me do what I want now, and then God, I'll get to you later. Later just seems to never come. Now, what if you're old? Not saying anyone is, but if you were, you know, I've seen some old people, and this may come as a surprise. They're a little set in their ways, you know. I've lived this long. I don't plan on changing. Don't need to change. Shouldn't have to change. Whatever it is, every situation has a specific temptation that applies to it. I need to know what that is. I need to know, here's my situation, here's what I'm prone to be tempted to or by. I think also your personality. You know, most of you here have been through the personality seminars, or you're familiar with the ones that Lisa did with the colors. You know, the gold personality, it's that rules-driven person. You know, they try to do what's right. Well, that's a good thing, right? Yeah, but they can have they can be very critical and harsh when someone doesn't do what they think is right. That's the temptation. You know, a blue person, they want everyone to be happy. That's nice. But sometimes they can overlook the rules. It's like, oh, you know, whatever you want to do that makes you happy. That's a temptation. And to, you know, sort of, you get the balance of those two. Speak the truth in love. You know, the gold people, they're real apt to speak the truth. And the blue people, they're just all about love. But it says speak the truth in love. Do both of them. You know, you got those orange people. They're great at last minute stuff, and they can handle it, and they like to have fun. You want some of those people around. I've seen some orange people who, I tell you, they'll just bend over backwards to avoid a tough situation and dealing with the problem, because it's not fun. And then what about the green people there, those analytical people who like to figure things out, maybe come up with a plan? Well, let me tell you, those people, that would be me. I hate it when my plan doesn't work out, because chances are my plan is a good one. It should work out that way. Why in the world wouldn't it work out? I get so angry when my plan doesn't work out. That's my temptation. See, every personality has one. I need to know what it is, because let me tell you, Satan knows what it is, and he's going to be ready for it. You know, another situation or specific term, description, I guess you would say, is, you know, what about by gender, male and female? Is there anything you can say there that here's a temptation? And guys, I think we know what I'm talking about, don't I? Women are prone to gossip. Nothing there? Oh. That's not really how I expected that to go, but you know, I was remembered, you know, the Andy Griffith Show. You can relate everything back to an Andy Griffith episode. And you remember when Andy and Barney saw the women gossiping, and he told you women, that's all you do. And what they do? They planned a little seed, and Andy and Barney ran off with it and just got into this huge mess. And they sat back and just laughed at him. So that one isn't just a man or woman thing. I think we're all prone to that in our own way. But you know what, guys? There is one that our gender is more prone to. Well, venting, that might be one. Oh, well, we might call it something different. I was at a minister's retreat a few years ago, and the speaker was talking about, you know, he worded it different. I don't know if he used the screenwriting term, know your fatal flaw, or what. You know, what's the thing that can really trip you up? What's Satan going to attack you with? And people, you know, he didn't like say, all right, everyone name theirs, but some people in the room said that. And I remember there's one woman like, well, I'm just not sure what mine is. Like, oh, you guys know what yours is? I don't know what mine is. And no one really said anything then, but then on the ride back, there's a bunch of guys in the van. And one of the guys is saying, is like, yeah, none of the guys raised their hand. We don't have to. We know what ours is. You know, there's a book called Every Man's Battle. And every man knows what it is. We don't have to be told. It's lust. It's the way we're made. It's a constant temptation. All right, I need to know that. That one's probably pretty obvious. I need to know, what is my greatest temptation? What is it? No, you know, no general would approach a war and not know, well, here's the makeup of my situation in my army. No coach would approach a game and not know, well, hey, my running back's out today. That's where I'm a little weak on the run game. Left guard, something. They know those things. Do you know your greatest temptation? Second thing is know how to resist my greatest temptation. Doesn't that make sense? Know what it is. Well, know how to resist it. It says in 1 Corinthians 10, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. Don't we sometimes feel like, wow, I am the only person who's ever gone through this. No one understands. It says nothing like that. It's everything as other people have faced it. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so you can endure it. There's the promise. There's never been a time in your life or my life that we've been tempted that we weren't able to resist it. Do you believe that?
It's His doing, though. That's the important thing. You got to let Him. He provides that way.
That's the whole point. I totally believe it's true, but I look at my life and like, wow, that means all those times? It's on me. And it even means the things that I specifically have been trying to overcome. God, you provide a way. I haven't found it. Okay, where is the way? Is it buried somewhere? The treasure map, find the way to resist it. We got to find out what it is. What's the wise way? Again, what's the wise way to resist my greatest temptation? Because it's not some of the ways I've tried. And really, I think that's the first thing. Know, first of all, what isn't the wise way? And the unwise way, the foolish way, the insane way that we try over and over again and think, maybe this time it'll work, is trying harder. Here's my temptation. Oh, I get angry when these things happen. Okay, next time I'll try harder not to get angry. Has it worked for you? Hasn't worked for me. Never. I'll even add like little reward, or usually it's punishments. Okay, if I get angry, no chocolate for 3 days. Well, maybe 2 days. Let's don't be extreme here. That didn't work either. None of that has worked. And the Bible says it won't work. Colossians 2:20, and it's not speaking specifically about this, but you can get the principle. Colossians 2:20-23 says, since you died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of the world. So the way the world does things. You died to. You said, I'm not going to live that way anymore. Why, as though you still belong to the world, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These rules, which have to do with things that are all destined to perish with use, are based on merely human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom. This is the way to do it. With their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body. It's got to be good. I'm disciplining myself in that way. I'm not eating chocolate for 2 days. But they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. They don't work. Now, those are talking about some specific human rules. Don't do this, don't do that. But I think the same thing can be said of the human approach. I'll just try harder not to do it. That will work. But yeah, he's saying these things don't work. And so wouldn't that make sense in whatever situation? I want to know what doesn't work. I've learned how not to do some home improvement projects, and really the big knot is don't do it. That's the big thing I've learned. Call Tori on most things. There we go. Yeah, learn what not to do first. And so don't just try harder. It doesn't work, never has, never will. So how do I wisely face temptations? Well, go back to what he says. This whole context, this whole section of James has been about this. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of various kinds. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And if any of you needs wisdom, if you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Wisdom is the how. How do I face these things? Well, I need to face it wisely. That's how I achieve my desired end. My desired end in this specific case, how do I resist a temptation? And the key here is don't try harder, try wiser. Trying harder to resist doesn't work. Let's try wiser. That's what James is saying. And what is it? Well, if you take his general principle, the general principle is focus on the spiritual, not the physical. It's that thing we saw in Matthew, and it makes sense now, doesn't it? No wonder Matthew spent so much time on that. The focus on the spiritual, not the physical. This basic foundational commitment, that's where it needs to start. Because think about it, if I'm focused on the physical, I'm focused on temporary, aren't I? And isn't that the problem with that the poor believer and the rich believer are susceptible to? I'm looking at things right now, the temporary. I don't have enough if I'm poor. I've got everything I need if I'm rich. Yeah, not for eternity for either one of you. You've got heaven in store for eternity, and the rich person, your wealth ain't going to help you for eternity. Don't focus on the physical, the temporary, me. Don't focus on me. Here's what I have, don't have. Focus on the spiritual, the eternal. What is true of me eternally? And with that comes a focus on God. That's what's going to get the poor person by. Again, I don't have a lot of stuff now, but man, I've got God in my life now, and I'm spending eternity with Him. It's not really going to matter down the road. I've got all this stuff if I'm rich, and it's nice now, but boy, if this was all I had, what a lousy eternity I'd have in store. And I know it. And I am not glorying in this. I'm not taking pride in this. I'm glad it's all going to fade away because that keeps my mind focused on God. That's the wise way to do it. What's my greatest temptation? And how do I resist it? Well, I need to do it wisely. Get rid of the physical perspective and get a spiritual one. And then the last thing that we've got to take into account is know what's at stake. Think about it. We know already what's at stake. Well, every time I give into this temptation, it gets a problem in my family. You know, I get angry and I alienate my kids or my wife. I do this, I get impatient and it never works out. All this stuff. I don't forgive and it destroys relationships. Okay. And we also know God's expectation. Consider it pure joy. We got to read that verse in light of what we've been seeing today. This is a situation, being tempted, consider it pure joy. Why? Well, what's joy? Because God can receive glory from this. I can grow and God can receive glory. But look what James adds. He says, here's what else is at stake. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. First of all, blessed, it's that same word from back in the Beatitudes. You remember the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed is he, blessed is he. Doesn't mean happy. You know, it's way more than happy. It's more objective. Someone would look at you and say, blessed is Jess. God has had a distinct, tangible, objective impact, and it blessed. That's what blessed means. Not like, wow, that person's happy. Deeper than that. What does it mean to be blessed? Well, unfortunately, here's where we run into trouble, because in the U.S., if I were to ask U.S. Christians even, what's it mean to be blessed? Oh, well, that means to, I've seen the TV preachers, that means to have this and not have any problems. That's what it means to be blessed. And that is so not what the Bible means. Again, it's this presence of God in your life, but it doesn't say how it's going to result. And we're so tempted to this. Matter of fact, as I was getting ready for the sermon this week, and I was late and in traffic, and I thought I had this wise thought. I said, next time this happens, right now, and then from now on, when this happens, I'm just going to stop and realize, you know what? God can bring something good out of being late. Maybe by being late, I will get to the place I was going, and I'll run into someone I wouldn't have seen otherwise. Maybe I avoid the accident. Maybe, all this stuff. Like, wow, just think of the good things God can bring out of being late. And then I realized, that's a 21st century American Christian perspective. You know what might come out of being late? I might be late. That might be. There's no guarantee that, okay, here's the reason, so you could meet this person. It would all work out wonderfully. No, I just may be late. But God says, be late, be at peace, grow from it, be a little more mature than you were yesterday. Okay, that's what you want me to do, God. Oh, well, I'd really like to meet that person who's going to really change my life and, bring abundance. And no, I just want you to grow up a little. That's what blessed is. And so look at the key here. He says, that person who perseveres will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. Well, first of all, what's the crown of life? And most of us, what do we think of with the crown, the medal, King of England, Queen of England type crown? This crown is more the laurel wreath that the Greek athletes would have received for winning a game. So just to have in mind, that's just a small thing. What's the meaning of this crown of life, though? Look at Revelation 2:10. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. This is talking about eternal life here. Be faithful as a believer unto death. Paul says in other places, you've got to finish the race. It's not, I was a believer for 3 years, But then the rest of the time until I died, I wasn't. That's not finishing the race. Be faithful unto death, and you will receive the crown of life. You will receive eternal life. Well, stop and think about it for a minute. Has the opposite implication hit you yet? Be faithful unto death, and you'll receive the crown of life. So if I'm not faithful unto death, I won't receive the crown of life. James says that person, what person? The one who perseveres under trial, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life. The Lord has promised to love him. So does that mean if I don't persevere, I won't receive the crown of life? That's what it sounds like. 1 Thessalonians 3:5, Paul says, "For this reason, when I could stand it no longer, I sent to find out about your faith," talking about the people in Thessalonica. "I was afraid that in some way the tempter," who's that? The devil, Satan, "had tempted you." So he's talking about the specific thing, temptations, and tempted you, and that our labors might have been in vain. What were their labors? Telling them about Christ, so that they became a believer. Well, what would in vain mean? We preached it, we started you, it didn't have any effect, or at least it didn't stay. Didn't stick.
The law stuff kept creeping in.
Something, whatever, you gave into whatever temptation Satan tempted you with, to the point of everything we said was in vain. You aren't a believer anymore. You aren't a Christian anymore. Wow, that's a pretty big at stake. Now the first question that comes to mind, and it should, I hope it does, is that sounds like sort of works-based salvation, is it? Well, remember, salvation is not based on a level of works. God doesn't say, all right, 75% and above you're in, 74 and under you're out. Now, do we have a level of works? Yeah, we all could look and say, hey, you know, this week, this day, this minute, I'm at 83%. You know, boy, last Tuesday about 12, I was at 52%. It was a bad time last Tuesday. Now, we could look and find these levels. Salvation isn't based on that. It's based on the presence of faith. That commitment. Again, not just I believe the facts, but I trust in them. I rely on them. I'm surrendered to God. And again, that commitment, as we saw in Matthew, it's foundational. It has to be there. Luke 9:23, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." Has to be there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be total. Well, what James is saying here is, you know what? He started it off saying, temptation, if we face it the right way, can make us stronger and more complete. But what's he saying here? He's saying temptation, if we face it the wrong way, if we totally abandon our commitment to God, it can take away the crown of life. God's not up there saying, I don't want to give it anymore. It's us saying, God, I'm no longer, whatever this temptation is, it can get to the point that I just totally abandon my faith. And God's up in heaven saying, it's not some level. It's not like, oh, you're not good enough now. You weren't good enough yesterday. That's not the point. You had this commitment, and now you don't. Don't let go of the commitment. Well, what's the root problem today as we bring it to a close? I think it goes back to there's such a common focus today on what we should do or not do. If you were to examine most teaching, most preaching, do this, don't do this, don't do this, by its very nature, that's a focus on me. I need to not do this. I need to do this. If there's any how, the only how in a lot of the teaching is try harder. And the only why, the deepest, what should be the strongest motivation, avoid hell. Now, is that a why motivation? It is. Is it the best why motivation? It's not. And that's why the key to overcoming all of this wrong focus is to focus on God. We know the what. If not, find out what's right, what's wrong. I do run across people sometimes. I ran across a woman a while ago. She was talking to me. She was having an affair with a married man. She says, I knew it was wrong for him because he's married, but it's wrong for me too? I'm like, yeah, it is. That one's pretty clear too. So there are times we need to refresh our memory on what's the what. What does the Bible say to do or not do? But I tell you, we got to focus on the how. On God and His strength to overcome through, as it says in Romans, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's why every time you see a what, there'll be something around it that's the how. Romans, the what is, get along with each other. The how, understand grace, that we're all equally lost before God and equally in need of grace. And the why, of course, again, it is avoiding hell a legitimate why? It is. Is it the best why? It's not. The best why, a better why, is I want to grow and mature. Why? Because I want to have a closer relationship with God. And the ultimate why is because I want to bring glory to God. That's why I was made. I was made to glorify God. And that's what I want to do. Well, one last time in the verse, because it struck me too. Did you see this at the end of verse 12? Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. Notice it doesn't say to those who have faith in Him. You know, salvation is by faith, right? By grace through faith. But it's interesting. He says those who love Him. And you think about the implications. If you love God, well, you're going to be, well, one, you wouldn't even love Him if you didn't believe in Him and what He's done. But you're going to be surrendered to Him. You're going to rely on Him. And so that's the way James phrases it. To those who love Him. You know, if you truly love God, not just saying it, but you truly love God, this is what God has in store for you. Well, as we close today, and it's late, so this is the kind of thing we're going to have to take with us and think about. But here's what I want you to do. We look today at the wise way to resist temptation, and the two specific examples that James gave the wisdom for were if you're a poor Christian or if you're a rich Christian. And we gave some other temptations, like, okay, lust for a guy, it might be anger for a guy, it might be impatience. I want you to stop and think about your greatest temptation, and maybe we talk about this a little bit, I know, before we open up Tuesday night, or maybe next week, we'll see, since it's going to be, 5 of us here. Give it some thought. Talk to someone this week if you get together with someone else, a Christian. What's the wise way to resist your temptation? Again, the general principle is, well, instead of focusing on all the physical things, focus on the spiritual. Instead of focusing on the temporary, focus on eternal. Instead of me, on God. How's that work for your specific temptation? Now, again, if yours is to get angry, what's it look like? If yours is to lust, what's it look like? To gossip, what's it look like? Here's where I need to focus. Here's the perspective I need to have that will help me, because trying harder ain't doing it. I'm still there.